Well, hello, buddy, and welcome back to Showrunner Whisperer. This is your podcast where we take you inside the mind of television showrunners and what it's like to navigate a TV show in today's television landscape. I'm your host, Andy Behbakht, or Andy B, or Andy, whatever you prefer. As always, first of all, for any of our new listeners, welcome to the show. To any of our return listeners, welcome back. Happy to have all y'all here. Happy July, everyone. By the time you listen to this episode, it will be Wednesday, July 3rd. So hope everyone's doing great and having a great summer so far. I know it's a hard one for me, so it's fun sometimes until it's not. But yeah, we're back. We're back with another episode as we're entering a new month. And first of all, I want to thank everyone once again for checking out the latest episode, which was with Bob Parents of Kung Fu. I had a great time chatting with him and loved seeing the feedback and response to his episode, and getting seeing people getting to hear his experience of becoming a showrunner. And yeah, as always, if you have missed an episode, the the catalog is just growing. So if you want to go find the latest episodes, go to showrunnerwhisper.com or wherever you can get your podcast at and catch the latest episodes. We've had lots of great discussions with various showrunners, and more are being recorded as we speak. And on this one, we're doing a little special format again. We're doing a two-parter because a few months ago I had the great opportunity to chat with Mr. Mark Guggenheim, who, for everyone who's followed me, I have covered the DC TV Arrowverse for a long time, and so his name should not be unfamiliar to you. Yeah, Margaret was one of the creators of Arrow and DC Legends Tomorrow, and also just very much a creative drive of the Arrowverse franchise. And he's also worked on so many other things within television and film and comics. And we had a really great extended conversation that I felt, what, let's just split this up into two parts. I think it will be the best thing here. And I do want to give a little disclaimer first, because I know there's a lot of, including myself, a lot of listeners out there, who who dealt with some really painful things in our lives, and I want to give a little bit of a content warning that we do at one point in the episode discuss mental health and self harm and suicidal discussions. And I want to just give everyone that little preparation so that it doesn't catch you off guard or triggers you. Because again, I know it happens to me. I know it happens to a lot of people out there. So I just wanted to make sure that you're aware, if you're listening, if you're someone who's dealt with it, with any of it in your life, that it does come up and we talk about it for a good couple of minutes, but it's somewhere, like it's towards the middle of the episode, so just keep that in mind. But it's as emotional as it gets. It's also a story about healing and coming back from some of those dark moments in your life, as because again, television, I mean, working in Hollywood is it's not always as easy as some people make it out to be or think it is. And we discussed that very much at length. We also talk about the how Mark is dealing with post strike and where he is now, but also just how he got to where he is now in his career in this part one of our interview. So, but yeah, I want to make sure just to include that little disclaimer here right at the top. But also, just remind everyone, if you want to support the Showrunner Whisperer, again, I I don't need money. I don't, the only way, the best way to support the show. Follow the show on social media through all the links in the show notes. But also, if you haven't done so already, because again, this will only take a couple of minutes of your time when you do it. Go to Apple Podcasts. First of all, hit the subscribe button. But secondly, and this is very important because this is what I am really asking for a favor for here, is hit that 5-star rating review and leave some thoughts about what you think about the podcast, what you're enjoying about the podcast so far, and what we can do to improve the show. Because I'm always open to hearing honest feedback and constructive criticism, because I always want to make the products that I produce as good as best as they can be. So if you could just take a few minutes of your time to do that, it would mean the world to me, because also you're also helping out your fellow podcast listeners, because not everyone is on social media, which I totally get, because y'all, social media these days are not, it's not pretty as it used to be. And people discover podcasts sometimes very differently. And sometimes it is through seeing those high rated reviews, high rated podcasts on those Apple Podcast stores or on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast at, and it helps them discover a new podcast. So if you could just do that, it would mean a lot to me. But also, like, you could be introducing a lot of new viewers and listeners to the Showrunner Whisperer who may not even know the show exists because they're not on social media, which is perfectly fine. But with that said, I'm gonna stop talking, and we're gonna go over to me and Mark, our chat from a few months ago in this part one interview, and I will see you at the very end. So with that said, cue the music. Something I've been doing with all my guests I've talked to recently is kind of check in with them and see where they are right now in terms of after the strike, because you guys, wow, 2023 was not easy at all. So
No,
where
no,
are you right now with after all the negotiations and finally landing the deal, or where are you at with it today?
it's weird. Honestly, it's weird. Right before the strike, I set up a bunch of projects, and I call them my little turtle eggs. Because I picture sort of these turtles on the little baby turtles on the beach, and like some eggs are going to hatch, and some eggs are not going to hatch, and some are going to get eaten up by predators, and only a couple. I only need a couple of the turtles to make their way to the water, But I'm in the process, or I should say, my reps are in the process of negotiating those various deals, because those deals couldn't get negotiated during the strike, obviously. So I'm in this weird liminal space work wise where, like, on the TV side, I'm pitching a bunch of different things, almost to the point where I was actually telling my agent, like, today, I was like, I don't know if I want to attach myself to something else because I'm a little pitched out, and I haven't even gotten the chance to pitch anything yet. When I say I'm pitched out, I mean, like, I'm tired of developing pitches. It's free work. It's not exactly the kind of writing I love to do. I'd much rather be writing a script. But that's so that's the TV side. On the feature side, I just got word that I'm going to be doing a rewrite of a streaming movie. So I'm excited about that. That's a really, really cool project that I've been involved with in another manner. I'm being very cagey because we can't talk about the project yet, but that's been a lot of fun. So that's going to keep me busy on the feature side. Comic book wise, I've got a pitch over at Marvel that I'm waiting for some feedback on. And my novel comes out in July, which, it's funny, like, that feels so far away. And at the same time, I was emailing with a publicist today who's like, oh my God, like, you're starting very late in the game to publicize your book. I'm like, oh, wonderful. So yeah, so it's, a little bit of everything, just praying those turtles, make it off the beach. But it's a weird time. I mean, post the strike, there really hasn't been much of a, market for TV work. Most of my friends who only work in television are unemployed. The pitches that I have ready to go, I'm holding off on because while there are people to pitch to, those people are not buying. So that's frustrating. That probably won't change until, like, early March, I'm hearing. So it's a lot of, like, sit around and wait. So a lot of people are unhappy, and a lot of people are stressed, and a lot of people are anxious. And I think all of those emotions on their part are very, very valid, because it's everyone thought that after the strikes, everyone would be back to work. And that has proven to be true for a very, very, very small group of people.
Yeah, it's definitely, when we're talking about television, it's definitely the weirdest pilot season of all time, because usually now the time is when, everything starts shooting and we start
Yeah.
hearing, about our network presidents, are they happy with
Yep.
X, Y, and Z? But now, like this, it's the lightest we've ever had. So, I feel that I almost wonder if there's gonna be like I don't want to say saturation, but there will be a lot more next pilot season when, because people are, like you said, you are holding on, to those projects to pitch them later on.
I actually don't think so. I mean, if we're talking about broadcast television, if we're talking about, network pilot season, I don't think we're going to see a deluge at any point. I think the idea of ordering one or two things to pilot and ordering half those pilots to series, I think that's the new normal, unfortunately. It seems like, it's funny. I used to say that working in network television is like being a doctor in a hospital where the patients don't think they're sick. And I now, have come around to the feeling that no, it's a hospital where the patients don't care that they're sick. They're just, they're kind of just biding time until network television goes away entirely. There's not a whole lot of motivation on the part of the networks to try things, to shake things up, to try something new, to, try to bring some sort of, life back into the network model. They just
Yeah.
sort of seem very content to like, we'll do business as usual, as long as business as usual means less stuff. And when that runs out, it runs out, and network will be live sports and an unscripted television.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that there will be somewhere in the middle where, because, I feel very, when it comes to, because network TV is where, a lot of, like, for example, new writers get their big breaks and so
Sure.
on. So I'm hoping that um as hard as strike was, for you guys having, to really push, fight with the students and stuff like that, that eventually, there isn't less work to do now that we live in this post strike world.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean that's really the nub of it, which is there's just fewer jobs out there. There are fewer, network shows. Number one, those network shows are not doing 22 episodes anymore. Fewer episodes means smaller staffs. We sort of set a floor as a result of the strike, and that's good because Lord knows that floor was getting lower and lower and lower. As good as the floor is, it's, again, it's just a reflection of, the shorter the order, the fewer the writers, and thus the fewer jobs. It's tough out there. I know a lot of people who are, they're struggling with this new normal, because it's, everyone used to be, accustomed to having, multiple seasons of 22 episodes apiece. And those, it's like Bruce Springsteen wrote, those jobs are going, boys, and they ain't coming back.
Yeah, no, I cannot wait for the Gen Zs to listen to this and be like, 22 episodes. I thought everything was 8 episodes, 1 hour long on streaming. It's like, no, like, when I was growing up, it was always like 22 episodes, or if 24, if, depending on the
Yeah.
network. So
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
and but yeah, so every question I ask for every showrunner who comes on is, what is your definition of a showrunner?
I always describe it as a TV show is a small corporation, that employs anywhere from 200 to 500 people, and the showrunner is the CEO. It kind of it's a metaphor that kind of breaks down a little bit, because unlike a CEO, a showrunner is also, doing actual work. It's sort of like it's like being the CEO of Facebook if Mark Zuckerberg also still coded.
Hmm.
He might, for all I know. So, or to take another analogy, another metaphor, it's like being a manager and a player of a baseball team. You're managing, but you're also out on the field, with the rest of the team. So it's, that's sort of how I come to describe it to, people who are not familiar with the industry.
And because I know you and I were both passionate about comic books. If someone picked up your issue 1 of your origin story of how this all began for you, what does that origin story look like for you?
Um, well, nerdy, unpopular kid, growing up on Long Island, who always loved comics, whose dad owns or owned an electronics store. So we were the first people on our block with a VCR, a video cassette recorder machine. And as a result, I got access to a lot of, a lot of movies, watched a lot of television, read a lot of comic books. That was sort of the foundational experience that I had.
And then in the world of writing, like, do you remember? Do you remember when you first came to LA and when you first like got into the world of what was it? Did you start writing for movies or TV? Where did that start?
So when I moved out to LA, I already had a manager and I already had, a spec feature that had gotten me a lot of fans around town. It would ultimately go on to sell once I moved to LA. But I really wanted to work in television. That was my main goal. And um, I came out and I wrote my first week in LA. I wrote a writing sample. I wrote a spec West Wing. This is in the middle of the first season of the West Wing. That got me my first gig. It got me a job on a show called The Practice, which was about Boston attorneys. And it was going into its 5th year. And David Kelly, the creator of the show, he wanted to hire first-year writers who used to be lawyers. So it was very much the definition of, right place, right time. Um, I don't think, I don't think I'd be able to break in that way today. It doesn't seem that path in doesn't seem to exist anymore. It seems now breaking in is all through the assistant ranks. I could be wrong, if it's like specific of being a doctor or a lawyer, some sort of, particularized, profession or skill set that the show specifically deals with. Maybe there are other ways in, but for me, it was very, very lucky.
Because he was the first big showrunner you worked with, what were some of the takeaway lessons you still remember having worked under David's time on The Practice?
Well, it's funny. David is a very unusual showrunner. By his own admission, he'll tell you he doesn't like to run a room. So, he thinks through his pen. He isn't even like heavily involved in he isn't even heavily involved on the production side of it. David
Okay.
has sort of, I think David's favorite thing to do is to write. And what he's done, I think, very effectively and very intelligently is create an organization around him that maximizes his ability to focus on the writing. I also think, quite frankly, it doesn't hurt to be David Kelly. This is, when I came onto The Practice, David had, he already had like a gajillion Emmys for LA Law Fences. He had just won the best drama and best comedy Emmys in the same year for Alan McBeal in The Practice. And this is a long way of saying it's not like he got on any notes calls.
Hmm.
He didn't spend his time, on the phone with the studio, on the phone with the network, then doing rewrites on scripts based on the notes. It was like, no, then the scripts came out. Those scripts came out, and that's what you were shooting that week. So, I think, this was also early aughts. So I think the nature of television in general has changed. Back when I started off, there weren't story areas. You might do an outline for the network and then write the script, but there's so many more layers of deliverables and layers of notes now, to the point where I don't think show running is a one-person job anymore. I think it really does require 2 people, either a co-showrunner or at least a strong co-EP who can, help handle all the thousands of hours of notes. That alone is dealing with that alone is a full-time job.
So would you say that when you came on to when you went on to create Eli Stone, that you kind of came into the gig as a showrunner kind of fresh. You kind of had to like navigate your way through of discovering what is it like to be a showrunner.
Well, it's funny. Eli was the what I explain what I like to say about the Eli experience is it's when my dad was teaching me how to ride a bike. He would have me pedal and he'd hold the back of the bike and we'd go down the road, and at some point he'd take his hand off the back of the bike and I was riding the bike and I didn't know often when he was taking his hand off. And Eli was a bit like that, because what happened with Eli was this is especially true in the second season. Greg Berlanti and I and Michael, along with Michael Green, had set up Green Lantern as a movie at Warner Brothers, and Greg was attached to direct at the time. So, slowly over time, I noticed, wait, Greg's not in the office. There's no one holding the back of the bike. So I sort of came to show running, rather painlessly, in the sense that I wasn't conscious enough about to be scared. I just sort of showed up one day and I realized, oh, wait a second, like I'm the one fielding all the phone calls now from the network. I'm the one who's getting, the phone calls from the cast. And it was a very just sort of organic way of kind of sliding into it.
Because no, that's I wonder if that's like Greg Berlanti's style with other showrunners, where like it almost feels like he's holding the bike and then eventually he's just, wait, where did he go?
It's a little bit like that, yeah. There's so many great things about working with Greg, but one of them is the fact that he really has no interest in micromanaging. He really wants to work with people who want to take the ball, who want to, they want to be passed to, and he's more than happy to throw them the ball and let them run it down the field. And he's there, as sort of a stopgap if you need him. But he's also quite happy to let people, really do what he's hired them to do.
After Eli and you went, because the show where I got introduced to both of you guys was No Ordinary Family, which that was like one of the first few superhero shows where, like, anything superhero related I could show to my parents, where they're like, oh, it's not a costume. I'm like, no, like it's like, us, but if we had powers. So was it what were things that made it easy to go on the No Ordinary Family after Eli?
Well, it's funny. In between the two shows, I had after Eli was canceled, I signed an overall deal with ABC Studios, and as part of that deal, I then worked on a show called Flash Forward with David Goyer. And halfway through that season, I fired Flash Forward, and basically, didn't have a whole lot to do, until No Ordinary Family was ordered to pilot. And what happened there was Greg had co-created No Ordinary Family with a writer named John Feldman. And John had actually set up two pilots for ABC that year. One was No Ordinary Family, the other, I remember, was like a cop procedural. And John wanted to focus on the cop procedural. So they basically needed someone to, come aboard the No Ordinary Family pilot, do some rewrites, address some of the network notes in the script, and then see it through to production and then to post. And because I was under this deal at ABC Studios, and obviously I, worked with Greg on multiple shows by that point, it seemed like a no-brainer. I'm also, obviously a big comic book fan, so I responded to the idea of the show, and that was a great experience. Actually, David Semmel directed that pilot. We had a lot of fun prepping it and producing it. The cast was wonderful. The casting process was a joy. I really had a lot of fun working on that pilot. I was very, very proud of it.
Because, so with all that under your belt at that point, when you went on to Arrow, which again, I mean, to this day, almost 10 years later, is it still, do you still think back thinking like, wow, like we really made a franchise out of this when because I know you and Greg said in a lot of early interviews that we never intended like the Flash was not even like something we had on our mind. We were just focusing on telling a great ground story about Oliver. But like 10 years later, how do you look back thinking like wow, like what a surprise all that became.
Oh yeah, I mean, in so many ways that show changed my life, and I was not expecting that. I wasn't expecting that at all. In fact, the shows, it's very strange. Before that, the only show that I had been involved with from Jump that was a hit was Brothers and Sisters. And that was a show that neither Greg nor I created. Greg had come on to basically fix the show because it had some development problems at the beginning. Greg brought me on shortly thereafter. It was like, oh, you're growing grapes in a vineyard that you didn't originate. You're trying to make wine off of grapes that you didn't grow. Arrow was really like the first true success, like the first true hit for me. It was such a challenging show to do, particularly in the first year, that I was kind of like a horse with blinders. I don't think I truly understood and appreciated what it is we were doing. I was so busy just doing it. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say it wasn't until like several years in that I even sort of realized, oh, this is become like a whole thing. I remember getting a set photo from the Crisis on Earth X crossover, where it was all the superheroes across all the shows in on the deck or the bridge of the Wave Rider, and I just sent it to Greg with the caption, "What have we wrought?" I think honestly it wasn't until that photo where you saw everyone all together all at once that I realized, oh wow, this is a whole thing. Because I tend to be someone who just sort of really just puts their head down and does the work. And I don't, much to my detriment, I think. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what it means or, what's been achieved or not achieved. And I wish I did that a little bit more, because I certainly wish I did that more during the years of doing Arrow and Legends, because those were very special times, and they were special times for the industry. I think I don't think we could do Arrow today, certainly not the way we had originally done it. I don't think we could have done it with the amount of leeway and creative freedom that we had. It was a very, I think, special, unique time in the business, that may not come again.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, because you've been seeing probably as much as I have about the CW. Just, I mean, because I grew up with the CW from 2006
Yeah.
when I was basically still a kid, and now seeing that it is nothing like what we used to know. Like Mark Pedowitz is now gone. Like most of the, if not half or more of them are the people who made CW what it is now gone, and the shows are gone. So I think you're definitely right. It definitely, if it was today, it definitely would not have happened the same way.
No, it was a unique circumstance. I think the combination of Warner Brothers led by Peter Roth and CW led by Mark Pedowitz, that itself was unique. I think Mark and Peter they are not typical network and studio presidents, and I mean that in the best possible way. I think it also helped a lot that Greg had produced Jack and Bobby and Everwood for Peter at Warner Brothers, and Greg and I had both worked with Mark Pedowitz on Brothers and Sisters and No Ordinary Family and Eli Stone at ABC Studios. So there was a lot of trust, and that trust went both ways. Like, if they had a note that we didn't necessarily agree with, we trusted them that they were right. And if we wanted to do something that seemed crazy, they trusted us to do it. And just that level of creative collaboration between production, network, and studio, that's pretty rare, and I think it's especially rare these days. So I think again it was part of that special sauce that helped us, make what we ended up making.
Take me back to that first season of what is a challenge that people don't know that you guys had to that you had to juggle as a showrunner of, because the show was, I mean, because we're going back into 2012 where with this became the number one hit on the CW in terms of ratings. Critics were eating this all up. I was I was eating it up. So like so I imagine that the pressure must have been a little higher for you as helping running the room and everything. So what hurdles did you have to overcome in season one?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I don't know if we have that kind of time. Well, first of all, like in terms of pressure, shortly after the pilot got ordered to series, Peter Roth took us out to lunch and basically laid out for us in incredible detail the reality that if Arrow wasn't a hit, there would be no more CW. So it was like, oh, so the pressure of having a show and keeping the show on the air, that's one thing. But now we also have the pressure of keeping the whole network on the air.
Oh wow.
That's another thing. In terms of hurdles, I'd say there were two things. Well, first of all, for me personally, I was running the show with Andrew Kreisberg, who we now know or has now been made public is not the greatest guy, and that was a personal challenge for me. Then there honestly was the fact that we were trying to do a superhero show that in a way that had never been done before. The closest comp, especially in terms of time, was Smallville. But Arrow was nothing like Smallville. It was much grittier, it was much darker, it had a lot more action, and the type of action was very sort of stunts heavy, and it also had this, what I would sort of describe as a Nolan-esque verisimilitude. That made it challenging. There was a lot of discussion about, wait a second, so like the Arrow is going to have a secret identity, but he doesn't wear a mask, and there's grease paint on his face and a hood, and how's that going to work? And there, and some of that stuff was coming to us from the studio network, and some of it was us sort of learning on the job. Like there was you would not believe the amount of discussions and attempts just to get what we called the Arrow voice correct. There's an episode, there's a scene in episode 4 where Oliver, as the Hood, as he's known at that point in the show, is on a rooftop with Katie Cassidy's character, and they have to have a whole scene together. And there was, it seems simple, right? But at the time, it was like, well, how do you do this where Laurel doesn't seem like an idiot for not recognizing that it's her lifelong friend Oliver under that hood and doing that voice? So we actually had to like reshoot that scene, and we made several attempts. I remember actually going up to Vancouver and actually recording Steven doing a variety of different Arrow voices
Oh
on
wow.
my iPhone. And then taking that back to Burbank and meeting with the studio and the network and basically playing them for the studio and network executives and saying, we've got to pick something and we've got to stick with it. So everyone's got to be happy with whichever voice we go with. We all have to sign off on it, because once we tell Steven, this is the voice you're doing, that's the voice he's doing, and we're not having him redo it. So it was stuff like that. It was, we had the flashbacks, which was really like producing. I used to say, like, the first 5 seasons of Arrow with the flashbacks was really like producing 1.5 shows. The flashbacks were their own mini show. They took place on completely different sets. Usually those sets were not on location. I mean, sorry, but they were on location. They were not standing sets, with a completely different cast for the most part, completely different costumes. That provided a very, very, very interesting challenge to us. I realize in hindsight, what I should have done was call up Damon Lindelof and asked him how he did it on Lost. But it never occurred to me to do that. We just sort of, like I said, there was a lot on the job. So a lot of it was like figuring out really like, we always knew what the show was, but we never like, it took us a while to figure out how to make the show we were seeing in our heads. The first, apart from the pilot, which had no reshoots whatsoever, episodes 2 through 8 all had reshoots, some measure of reshoots. It wasn't until we got to episode 9, the mid-season finale, where I remember watching that particular cut in Greg's office with Greg, and we both turned to each other at the end of the episode and like just let out this huge sigh of relief that we were like, there aren't going to be any reshoots on this episode. And, to be nearly halfway through a season to reach that quote unquote milestone, that just shows you just how hard the show was. And also I will say like how high our standards, we really wanted to make sure that this show was going to be as good as we could make it. And part of that is because, David Nutter, who directed the pilot, set the bar so very high. Part of it was, Greg and I were still smarting from the experience of Green Lantern. Part of it was we just love this character so much. We wanted to make sure that we were, putting him out into the world in, the best possible way and in the best possible light.
You brought him up briefly, and I if you don't want to talk about it, it's perfectly fine. But because I now that we know what Andrew Kreisberg was capable of and so on, did any negative experiences working with him? How did that affect you, as a co-showrunner, but then also eventually, because eventually, you were, for a little while, you were like the sole boss of Arrow before Wendy and so on. So how did you navigate that?
It was hard. I mean, look, I've written in my newsletter that I was seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist, both of them once a week. I was, I had suicidal ideation. I am fairly certain my marriage was ended. Had one of us not left, had Andrew or I not left the show when he did. The hardest year, honestly, was season 3, and that was because Andrew had theoretically left to focus on Flash. So, one of the things Andrew was doing as a co-showrunner was helping me. We would each, we divided up rewriting the episodes. Suddenly I had to put all 23 episodes through my pen. So that like literally doubled my workload. And yet Andrew still managed to find a way to like throw hand grenades into the Arrow writers room. So that was definitely a struggle. And it was hard on the staff. I mean, the staff, we kind of joke, not even joke, but like the writing staff had PTSD to the point where I think once Andrew left the franchise, which was in the middle of Arrow's 6th season, the rest of the season, a lot of our emotional energy was spent on just sort of processing everything that had happened in the previous 5.5 years. And I think it took it took almost half a season for us to kind of get our mojo back and be able to move on. But I think television is hard. Making movies are hard. They're hard enough on their own. I think it's particularly bad when you've got I wouldn't say an outside force. It's really like an inside force, or like a third. When you have someone who is making the already difficult process miserable. I will say, like, I think the Arrow writing staff, they are some of the best writers I've ever worked with. They made it all possible. They were the ones who like made the show what it was. They had, I think, as much of an affection for the show as I did, and they wanted it to succeed as much as I did. And that's a really remarkable thing. And truth be told, it's not just the writers. That was the cast. That was the crew. We had a crew. There were a lot of people, a lot of department heads who were with us on day one and were with us on the final day of shooting. We even had some people hire, we brought on their kids. The show was on so long that we were able to, so we were able to like really create, I think, a wonderful family in spite of all the challenges. A lot of us still keep in touch with each other, and we were trying to do something. I don't want to pat us too hard on the back here, but we were trying to do something that I don't think had been done. No one had done obviously people had done superhero shows, but no one had done a superhero show quite the way Arrow was. And I think, again, David Nura set the bar very high. We were trying to, sort of produce a little mini 42-minute movie every week. And there were plenty of weeks we did not succeed, but I think there were plenty of weeks where we did. And that was because we had an amazing group of writers, group of actors, group of, incredibly talented craftspeople, directors, you name it, everyone. It really did take a village. Sorry, I got very far afield of the question, but I think, I think everyone was justifiably proud for the work, proud of the work they did. The show would not have been what it was, but for the contributions of all these people.
Hey, how you doing, party people? Let me whisper in your ear. Tell you a little something you might like to hear. What's going on, brothers and sisters? It's your man, Brother Nate from the Lituation Room, as well as the Kings of Sport podcast. And I'm here to tell you about the Multiverse of Color. See, the Showrunner Whisperer is brought to you exclusively by Multiverse of Color. Now, Multiverse of Color is your home for fresh takes on the world of pop culture by established journalists and emerging content creators. It's your one-stop destination for a vast array of articles as well as audio and video productions. Multiverse of Color features exclusive interviews, media event coverage, and film analysis. We're talking about all films, all movies out here on these streets, from Hollywood's biggest blockbusters to the most intimate of independent projects. So visit multiverseofcolor.com today, yes, today, right now, for all of the latest stories, and follow Multiverse of Color through the social media links provided in the description below. And now, back to the Showrunner Whisperer.
No, first, as someone who's, myself dealt with suicidal thoughts and, attempts, honestly, I'm happy you're still with us. I'm happy that
I'm happy I'm still with us too.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you're able to come out of this on the other end, because, because this was also in the midst of, people who listen to this now, this was right in the midst of the Me Too era when this all happened.
Yes.
And, so like for me, even though it was very much about what the writers of those respective shows that he worked on had gone through, I always knew at the back of my mind, that I'm sure he did something on Arrow. I'm sure he did something on the other shows too that he wasn't really involved with. And so, but yeah, so I'm despite everything, I'm sorry you guys, you and your colleague had to go through the landmines that was his presence, but and to see what he did wrong as a showrunner, for me, I imagine that must have also made it easy for you to know, like, okay, I need to make sure that this never happens under my watch, because once you're doing Arrow and then also Legends, I imagine that must have been an active thought on your mind at that time.
Honestly, it made me, it's a little bit like, you have to put your oxygen mask on first. I had so many emotional problems that I was trying to deal with. I wasn't, until he was gone, I wasn't able to fully, focus as I should have on everyone else. But the truth of the matter is that whole experience really reinforced for me the feeling that it doesn't matter what you are producing if you're not producing it in a great environment. In many ways, I'm more proud of the environments that we created on Arrow and Legends than I am of the shows themselves, to be honest with you. Particularly Legends. Legends was such a challenging show for completely different reasons than Arrow was. In many ways, Legends was challenging, partially from a production standpoint, because it was the first team, series we'd done. And it's like, well, how do you, it's one thing like Flash, he runs fast and they've got a system in place for how to produce that. But we've got, a character who turns to steel. We've got two characters who have wings on their back. We have, a character who his head is literally on fire and he can transmute any material into any other material. Like, I mean, an insane, cold guns, heat guns, you name it. And like, how do you produce all that with basically, how do you produce, 5 different sets of superpowers at least on the same budget and the same schedule that you have for shows that have one superpower? I have to say, like, and we also went straight from, presentation pilot to series. So that had its own challenges. And I have to say, it took, it took a little while, but once we sort of locked in the show creatively and locked in the show production wise, that set was the most fun set to come to. Like, the actors they all loved each other. Not that that's not true on other shows, but they had a special bond. And it was a special bond that I think really showed up on screen. It was just like, it was so just delightful to come visit that set. I can't, put it any other way. Like I said, I think it's all about, it is a family type of thing that you're always chasing, I think, as a showrunner. Like, how do people feel like this is family? And we were also very lucky, I have to say, that both shows had such longevity, because in that longevity you have a lot of opportunities to grow people's careers. We had, Beth Schwartz being sort of the test case. She was our writer's assistant on, she was the writer's assistant on season 1 of Arrow, and by the end of the show, she was running the show. And she's not the only success story we had like that. We Amelia Aldrich, we had a lot of people who came to the show up through the assistant ranks, and that's also true, by the way, on the crew side. You had people who start off as assistants and move up the ranks of the crew. Like I said, we even had a couple people who were able to hire their kids, and you only can do that if you're going for 7-8 years. And it's funny, we were talking earlier, again, I'm sorry, I'm getting far afield, but
No, you're good.
We were talking earlier about, the contraction in network television and how broadcast TV is and what it used to be. It's not just the number of episodes per season, it's the number of seasons. You see, no streaming show is going 7 years, 8 years. That's you're lucky if you can get 3 seasons out of most streaming shows. I think that's really, it's definitely, I don't know if it's to the detriment of the audience, though I could make the case that it is, because I think television is designed for long form storytelling, and 2 years is certainly less long form than 7 years. But you're to the detriment of the growing of careers, particularly writers. But it's funny, even not even just writers. Like, I'm thinking, like, we had a lot of directors who came out of the camera department, who came out of the editorial department, who directed their first episodes of television.
You got stunt coordinators like James Bamford.
Exactly. Like, you're able to provide those opportunities to people because because you're allowing people time to grow into the positions that they're ultimately going to go into. So I don't know what the solution is, to be honest with you. I think a lot about this, like, okay, well, how do we fix this? Because the pipeline is broken. I don't know how to fix it. And the strikes were not entirely about this, but not entirely not about it either, if that makes sense. I spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about the problems of the industry and if there are ways to sort of fix them, because it's only by allowing people to grow as artists that you get the best product, that you get the best TV shows and the best movies and the best seasons of television. And I think we continue down this path without an alteration, without a course correction, at our peril.
Can you talk to me about, because again, I during my career as like growing up as a journalist and whatnot, I remember when I had to start hearing about showrunners, they also have to they have their bosses they have to listen to in terms of like studio notes and network notes, and in your case also you had to you have a third boss with something like with DC. What were some of the I don't want to say fight, but what were some of the things you had to put, really fight for it to happen on Arrow, for example, that people may not know of? Because like you say, you talked about how much Arrow was so, the CW was really dependent on Arrow's success. So what was the situation that you guys would find yourself in of having to push for things that ultimately happened on the show, but maybe almost didn't?
That's a great question. Believe it or not, the thing we probably had to fight for the most was what I will describe as masked character. There was occasionally a tension between the show's, like I said, sort of Nolan-esque fidelity and the desire on our part to sort of make this feel like a DC comic come to life. So, there was, I can't honestly, though, think of anything where they said no and put their foot down in a way that we couldn't have a discussion about. One of the things that I really admire Peter and Mark for is you could always get them on the phone and you could always talk something out, and more than that, you had the opportunity to plead your case. I'm a former lawyer, and the opportunity for me to plead my case it's very important. I don't like being just shut down as a matter of principle. There were times where we got okay, if that's what you want to do, we'll give you enough rope to hang yourself. But they never said no. And we never had to be like, put our foot down. It never got to that point where, people are threatening to cancel the show or threatening to quit or threatening to be fired or anything like that. I think sometimes the biggest challenge, honestly, was the crossovers. And, and because again, this was something that, hadn't been done during this era of television and hadn't been done on the scale that we were attempting it. And that was, again, a very good example of us learning on the job. There was certainly, there's certainly a struggle of like, how much money are we going to spend on these things? And they get expensive very, very fast because for production reasons, for scheduling reasons, time on location, actor fees, you name it. They're not cheap. But like I said, we always got, the support and encouragement we needed, even when it was like, okay, it's your funeral. There are plenty of it's your funeral kind of moments, but the great thing about Peter and Mark and our relationship with them was the fact that we'd all known each other for so long and done so many shows cumulatively together that, like I said, there was just a lot of trust there.
But because those crossovers, I remember just because I've covered Arrowverse, since the beginning, and I remember, when the crossovers were always happening, there was just always, so much for us as journalists just to cover in terms of like, oh, there's this casting news or there's this interview. So, but for you guys on that end, that must have been 10 times as big. So, especially again, because people who may not realize that this would sometimes involve 5 shows all at the same time and dealing with all their crews and all their teams and so on. So I can only imagine what has. By the time you guys got to the Crisis, I'm not saying that okay, now you've been there and done that, but like did all that crossovers prepare you for handling, because I remember I think you were described as the Crisis show. Wait, hold on, let me rephrase that. Crisis on Infinite Earth show. When I say Crisis show, it sounds like I'm like
sometimes it felt like I was managing a crisis.
But did it help you prepare you for that?
It did. The great thing was after every crossover, we would actually do a post-mortem with the studio and the network, and we would basically be like, okay, well, what went wrong? What went right? And every season, we basically sort of changed up the way we produced each crossover. That's something like no one really knows, is that like we would basically build in, like after the first crossover where we really didn't know what was going on, we were like, okay, like we need to build in what we called sort of overlap days or gap days, where like literally like one show would shut down so that the cast of that show could go to the other show.
Are those the dark days that because I heard people
Yes,
who
the
were
dark
said
days.
they call them dark days. Okay, so
Yeah.
okay, that's it.
Yes, and I try to avoid using dark days. To me, implies the end times.
No, just for context for
Yeah.
listeners, this was because I knew a lot of people who worked on crew. This is what they literally would call them because, I even remember saying like, "Is it that's something bad?" Like, no, we just don't work that day because
Right.
they go with their other shows, so people don't think there's like
Yeah,
this
I know.
mysterious.
No, they were those were So like just like the the initiation of those dark days was something we had to learn by experience in from the first crossover, and then the number of dark days we needed was indicated to us by the second crossover. And by the third crossover, I wanted to do what I called a show agnostic approach, where the third crossover was going to be Invasion, but it was Crisis on Earth X, I think, when we first did this, where the fourth crossover, where it was going to be 4 shows, but it wouldn't be an episode of Supergirl, an episode of Flash, an episode of Legends. It was going to be Crisis on Earth X Part 1, Crisis on Earth X Part 2, Crisis on Earth X Part 3. And we were going to do, different title cards and everything else. It was just these like little things of like, okay, we've done this before. What did we learn? What did we learn creatively? What did we learn logistically? I remember like Elseworlds was an incredibly pleasant and easy crossover. It was easy to break. It was because the tone of it was lighter. It was, Oliver and Barry doing the body swap thing, but also part of it was Crisis on Earth X was so difficult. That was incredibly challenging. And it was particularly challenging on the cast because the idea of evil doppelgangers sounds wonderful on paper until you realize that, wait a second, all those actors have to basically play 2 roles now. We've literally doubled the amount of screen time they are getting. If I thought scheduling across 4 shows was hard before, scheduling across 4 shows when a good chunk of that cast has to appear as 2 different characters, it's just, honestly, like, in some ways, Crisis on Earth X was harder than Crisis on Infinite Earths, but only in some ways.
Because again, at the time we didn't know that this was going to be the last crossover, because again, no one was ready for the pandemic,
Right.
and we weren't ready for again, also the CW just starting to kind of like unravel on itself. But I know you talked a lot about Crisis on on your newsletter. I know there was a lot of discussion last year of like things you had to do that people didn't know about for Crisis for it to happen. Looking back at it, are there things that you wish you could have done differently?
Oh God, yes. Oh my God, so many. Truth be told, I don't think I've ever produced a single hour of television where I haven't wanted to get something back and try again.
Fair enough.
For Crisis, that's definitely true. It's funny. It's the 5th and final hour that I struggle with the most in my head, because we unfortunately we had built in 2 days of shooting for the climax with the Anti-Monitor, and unfortunately, sometimes the weather gods cooperate with you, and sometimes they really screw you over. And we got really screwed over by the weather. It rained, like poured on day 1, and it was clear on day 2, so nothing matched, which basically meant that like day 1 was completely unusable. It was the end of this big thing, and it wanted to be big, it wanted to be epic, and it always feels small to especially compared to the previous 4 hours. And it's not like people think like, oh, they ran out of money. It doesn't work that way. All these things are being written and shot at the same time. It's not like it's not like we we shot 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and just had no money by the end of the thing. We just logistics, especially when it's funny when you shoot in Vancouver.
Oh,
You'd be
good old Vancouver.
I mean, I love shooting in Vancouver. I love the people. I love the crews there. It's wonderful, but you won't believe the number of near misses. I actually think I can't we got so lucky so many times with the weather when it looked like we wouldn't. Like at the end of Crisis on Earth X for the the double wedding scene, I got on set for call that day and it looked like it was going to pour. The skies were gray. It was horrible. It was the most unromantic, least wedding like environment. And just like literally the second before we were supposed to roll camera, it was like an act of God. Like the clouds parted and suddenly the sun was beating down and it was glorious. But it was like literally right before we were about to shoot. When we were shooting the end of the season finale of season 2 of Legends, with the big sort of World War II battlefield, huge climactic moment. It had snowed the night before, and it was covered with snow, like covered with snow.
Really?
Yes. And I gotta say, Legends producer Val Stefoff is one of the all-time best line producers I've ever worked with. This guy works miracles. In this case, he worked a literal miracle. He got hot water trucks out to the location and basically sprayed it down, and like between shoveling and melting the snow and everything. You watch that episode, you would never know that like literally an hour before we were scheduled to shoot, it was
Oh, wow.
it looked like a blizzard. Just a lot of that kind of stuff. So I mean, overall I can't complain. I think we got lucky far more often than we got unlucky, and certainly far more often than we deserved. But for the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths, that still vexes me. There's a lot of there's a lot of like, just to make that sequence work, there was like a day of reshoots. There's CG. There was I mean, you name it. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of spit and baling wire holding that climax together. So that's definitely an area where I'd like to have a gimme. I go back and forth myself on, did we have too many cameos? But I think in many ways the reason we had so many cameos was we didn't know how many we would actually get. It was a little bit like the way you book a plane, and you sort of have to overbook the plane because some people are not going to show up. Well, this was like when you go to the airport and they're offering free tickets to people because everyone showed up. I would describe that as a quality problem. The sequence at the end of the whole event, when I always said it's our going around the horn sequence where we see the reconstituted multiverse. I don't think people realize how hard that sequence was, because every single actor who appears in that needs, not only did I have to get approval from the various shows, every single actor had to sign off, and every single actor had to be compensated, which meant that I had to negotiate, I forget how many deals it was, call it 15 different actor deals. And each time, it was like, okay, I basically I had to set a rate and hold to it, because if one actor wanted more, then I'd be, I wouldn't be treating all the actors fairly. If one actor wanted more than I had budgeted, it would suddenly become, multiply that over 15 actors, and you start to see the problem. That was, I mean, it was like a labor of love, but man, I was like on the phone constantly. I had like a whole little spreadsheet between contact, information, like agents, managers. There were some actors who really needed to be talked into it. It was, like I said, I had to talk to every showrunner. Getting Swamp Thing was tricky because the show wasn't even, the show had been canceled by that point. Footage from the Green Lantern movie, you name it. It was challenging.
Doom Patrol, Titans,
Yeah,
and
by the way, the Doom Patrol thing was amazing because that was like, just sort of B-roll that they had, and it was like perfect
are you
because
kidding me?
yeah,
Like really, wow.
yeah, it was perfect because it's so
in their in character for them.
in character, in a way that was very true to the spirit and the tone of that show. I mean, truth be told, of everything that's in Crisis, the going around the horn sequence might be my favorite. Down to Brandon doing the Superman the movie flyby, and with the John Williams score, it's like just things that I never could have imagined we would get to do.
No, I will admit it. I mean, I, as a huge nerd, I mean, that's one of the scenes I will, go and rewatch over and over and over again because, first of all, Blake Neely and his team of composers, they're freaking goats for, again, like, because, that's why I feel like we really got the Arrowverse Justice League theme, but just, but then seeing all of the other shows again, like because again, because I knew that of course they're not going to blow up the whole multiverse. Of course it's going to come back somehow. But if we actually get to see, I mean, you guys, I remember the night when Twitter like basically lost their shit for about, excuse my language, because when Stargirl popped up, they're like, wait a minute, what? We get to see actually Stargirl before the show was actually premiered,
right? And I will say, like, again, that was such a great example of the way all these showrunners from non-Arrowverse shows all came together, and and we're just on board. We're just they wanted it to be great. Blake, he worked with a live studio orchestra, which is not typical for television, certainly not network television. Bringing in, ringers from rock bands, literal rock bands, to play on this. It was a labor of love for everyone involved, and everyone went the extra mile. Everyone knew that you get one shot at this. And when I say that, I'm not talking about like only comic book fans. There are a lot of actors and showrunners and directors, and crew members who are just, they're not comic book fans. They love the shows and they love the stories that we're telling, but they don't have the reverence for the original comic as some of us do, and yet they were still so invested by what we were trying to put on film, that you had a lot of people doing Herculean work under challenging conditions and tight budget constraints, to literally pull off magic. I feel like if you the bitter truth of doing television and film is, if you do it right, no one knows how hard it was. I wish people could know just how hard everyone involved worked. Six shows worth of cast and crew and producers and writers, and it's a lot of people working extremely hard for a lot of hours.
No, but I mean, when you were telling me about how you had to get permission, for that big, post multiverse sequence, I always imagine, they just go to Warner Brothers TV and just ask for permission. But no, it's like it's all the people who work on those shows. Is that probably why we didn't see something like Smallville, like in like the post? Because I know you have to come out on Twitter and be like, "Don't worry, they're fine. We didn't kill them."
It really was. I don't know. Why didn't we have Smallville? I'll be honest with you. First of all, I think it was two reasons. Number one, it never occurred to me until I got the question on Twitter that people would think we did blow up the Smallville universe. So part of it was that, and part of it was we obviously seen Clark and Lois in episode 2. For the most part, the going around the horn was to see all the universes and all the characters that we didn't get to see. So I think that's probably why. I mean, look, yeah, if I could have done it all over again, it would be awesome to like just have a shot of Lois and Clark on the farm kissing for the go around the horn sequence. But yeah, sorry, I dropped the ball on
No,
that.
no, it's fine. No, listen, I know how hard that crossover was, so I imagine, like, oh yeah, it must have been probably one of those, because they had to cut it out of time, or they couldn't get, like they didn't have. I know
Well,
you had
also,
Tom for one day, right?
we did just a few hours, but also here's the thing, under SAG rules, um, an actor gets paid for they don't get paid by the amount of time they spend on set. They get paid by the number of episodes they're in. So if like, Tom was contracted for episode 2, and if Tom appeared in episode 5, that would trigger a completely different payment. And certainly didn't have the money for that. But that, like I said, that really wasn't a factor. It was, it just, quite frankly, just didn't occur to me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I understand. And that's gonna be it for part 1 of my chat with Marc Guggenheim. It was, as you could hear, it was a lot of things to cover, and we got lots more in part 2. So look forward to that on later this month, on Wednesday, July 17th is when part 2 will come out. So, and yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot that we discussed throughout his time before and during and even after the Arrowverse. So, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got you took a lot away from it, as much as I did. And yeah, again, if you're enjoying these conversations, look forward to more. More of it is coming. But that's gonna be it for episode 8, y'all. Oh, God, we're almost at episode 10. It's crazy, y'all. Let's go. Let's go. So, but as always, I want to remind everyone where you can find the Showrunner Whisperer at. So first of all, if you're like me, you're on social media, you're using all of them good apps. There's too many these days. First of all, if you want to follow the Showrunner Whisperer, you can follow at Showrunner Talk and at Multiverse Color on Twitter. I'm sorry, Elon. I'm not gonna call it X. It's stupid. It's ridiculous. You know it. So at Showrunner Talk and at Multiverse Color, and on Instagram we're at Showrunner Whisperer and at the Multiverse of Color. So, and that same thing goes for Fred at Showrunner Whisperer and at the Multiverse of Color. And then if you love good old Facebook, and if you're old like me or whatever, and you can find us at Showrunner Whisperer on Facebook and at Multiverse of Color on Facebook as well. And then last but not least, we're on good old TikTok at Showrunner Whisperer and at Multiverse of Color. So again, links to all the socials for the show and Multiverse of Color, which is what's makes this podcast possible, can be found in the show notes as always. If you want to find me, you can follow me at Andy Behbakht on every social media platform there is, basically, because who knows when Twitter will die. At some point it might. Hopefully it won't, because I don't want to lose Twitter. And yeah, so all my social media handles are in the show notes as well, so you can follow up and keep up with everything that I do. I'm a senior writer and an interviewer for ScreenRant.com, so I cover all the latest superhero news within television and film, as well as hot interviews for various films and TV series. So check me out there. I'm also, of course, the editor-in-chief of Multiverse of Color, and also just going to remind everyone, if you're following San Diego Comic-Con this year, we're gearing up for San Diego Comic-Con big this time. So check out multiverseofcolor.com for all the latest articles with news, reviews, interviews, you name it. And yeah, that's where you can find me at. And as well, of course, the Showrunner Whisperer, all the subscription platforms are in the show notes. So if you love Apple Podcasts or Stitcher on Spotify or iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Audible, you name it, I provide a link to all of those platforms in the show notes or the video description, depending on if you're watching us on YouTube. Which, by the way, we're almost at 300 subscribers on Multiverse of Color's YouTube channel. So if you would love to support us, get us to 300 subscribers before the end of the month. That would be great. And Yeah, and like I said at the beginning of the show, if you could just take a few minutes of your time, head over to Apple Podcasts. First of all, hit subscribe if you haven't done so already, but also leave us some 5-star reviews. It would mean the world to me. And it was all the best and easiest way to support the podcast so that more people could discover it and so that we could also, it might lead us to more opportunities of who will come on the Showrunner Whisperer. I'm just putting it out there. So it will only take a few minutes of your time. And also, I would love to hear your feedback, what you think about the show and what we can improve on with the Showrunner Whisperer, because I'm always open to feedback. But yes, that's going to be it for episode 8. Once again, part 2 with MARC Guggenheim will be dropping on Wednesday, July 17th. So only 2 weeks from now. So again, enjoy the episode. Hope you enjoy the episode. If you're gonna re-binge it again, enjoy it again. And again, as always, a huge thanks to my entire media team of Julian Bell, Mike Schmidt, and Nate Milton. And on behalf of my amazing army here on the Showrunner Whisperer, I'm everybody, and I will see you next time on the Showrunner Whisperer.